And let's begin. So good afternoon, folks. Thank you for tuning in to another Risk Institute Online session. Today, we're really delighted and fortunate to have with us the wonderful Dr. Sara, and I'm not really sure how to pronounce your last name. Actually, I should have asked beforehand.
It's Owczarczak-Garstecka.
Okay, fantastic. The presentation will be around 45 minutes with around 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A. Please make sure that your mics are muted, and if you'd like to leave a question, you can raise your hand at the end of the conversation or leave them in the chat. The talk today will be around when science has gone to the dogs, mixed methods approaches to studying dog welfare and human-dog interactions. So before we begin, I'd like to make a few announcements about upcoming talks. On the 17th of May at 2 p.m, we have our very own Mr. Vladimir Stepanov discussing his research. And on the 25th of May at 4:30 p.m, one of our speakers had to delay her talk, but she'll be talking to us from NASA around 3D imagery to support planetary exploration. Following that, on the 31st of May, we have Enrique Morel-Dols from our Institute too. And on the 6th of June, we have Dr. Dalal Araja from Imperial College. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker from previously our institute that graduated over the pandemic. So Sara studied anthropology at UCL and received an MSc in Clinical Animal Behaviour from the University of Lincoln before starting on an MRes PhD at the Risk Institute, Institute for Infection and Global Health at Liverpool. In her PhD, she used mixed methods to explore perception and prevention of dog bites. Since completing her PhD, Sara was awarded the Animal Welfare Foundation grant, congrats, which enabled her to carry out her postdoctoral study into access to veterinary health care during the COVID-19 pandemic. She now works as part of the Dogs Trust research team, which she's going to be talking to us about today. So without further ado, would you like to start showing your slides, Sara?
And unmuting.
Yes, I'm going to share my screen. Thank you. Can you see my screen okay? Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you for the introduction. It's good to be back, even if just virtually. I guess that's the kind of way of life right now. So I'm assuming that you guys haven't done any research into kind of dog behavior and welfare. So I'm going to first talk briefly about what I think are the biggest issues around dog welfare in the UK at the moment. And then I'm going to take you on a scenic route through different studies that illustrate kind of trying to unpick those issues and also highlight different methodological approaches to studying human-animal interactions and dog behavior in particular. So if you had any questions throughout the talk, just stop me and ask me to clarify. I hope that makes sense. This dog on the picture is a dog I've met during my PhD. His name is Chico. And I think at the time he was about 7 months old, so he still had quite a lot of growing up to do and growing into himself. So he was a big boy. So I just thought I will introduce you my participant to begin with. Okay. So just to give you a brief overview, the biggest dog welfare issues in the UK, according to me, not Dogs Trust, according to my kind of research and what I've been studying, are issues to do with dog acquisition and breeding, breed-related health issues, in particular in relation to brachycephalic dogs. Brachycephalic dogs are dogs with very, very short faces, like your bulldogs or pugs or French bulldogs, boxers. Dog obesity, dog owners' understanding of dogs' body language and behavior in general, and perhaps lack of knowledge and skills and resources needed to help their dogs. So these were the issues before 2020, and then COVID pandemic hit and made everything worse. And now we are kind of in a place where those issues didn't go away. But we are also having very understaffed and under-resourced veterinary sector that hopes to deal with this situation. So I'm going to kind of walk us through some of those issues right now. So going to dog acquisition, there are different estimates of dog population in the UK. According to the most accurate ones, there are about 12.5 million dogs in the UK at the moment. And those dogs come from different sources. So some of them will be bred by breeders, some of them will come kind of through dog shelters. But puppy smuggling, which is illegal transport of young dogs through the border, across the border to the UK, is actually a highly profitable business. I think it's third most profitable source of income, illegal income in the UK after smuggling drugs and guns. And the fines for puppy smuggling are pretty much non-existent. So a lot of kind of criminal masterminds have turned away from drugs and into puppy smuggling. So we have an awful lot of puppies being smuggled to the UK. And the issue of puppy smuggling, aside from the fact that, you know, those pups are kept in horrendous conditions during transport, are that most of those pups will come from puppy farms in Europe. And puppy farms are literally like farms for breeding pups. And the issue with that sort of situation is that those dogs receive very little socialization and kind of human interactions or exposure to their wider environment when they are young. And that in turn means that there are higher odds of those dogs developing all sorts of medical problems throughout their lives. They have higher chances of showing fear-related behaviors and other behavioral problems later in life. And the primary behavior related to fear in dogs is aggression. So those are the dogs that are more likely to bite people and other dogs. And generally they're kind of more likely to show all sorts of kind of anxiety related behaviors. We also know that since 2016, there is an increasing number of people who consider purchasing dogs, who want to get dogs from abroad. That increased from 28% to 38% in 2020. And we know, in fact, that 14% of dogs acquired since March 2020, so since the pandemic, came from abroad. And that's kind of a response to the puppy boom, where everyone wanted to get a puppy during the pandemic. So in total, in 2020, we've estimated that between a third to a quarter of dogs that are younger than 4 years of age in the UK came from a puppy farm. And during 2020 lockdown, Google searches for buy a puppy were up by 213%. So you kind of can see like that this demand for puppies have driven potentially quite bad breeding practices that have a very negative impact on dog welfare. And before you kind of start thinking about all of those awful people buying from smuggled puppies, it can be incredibly difficult to recognize that a puppy has been smuggled, because as I've mentioned, professional criminals are now involved in puppy smuggling. So they can set up fake houses where you can see your pup with their mother and won't be able to recognize that that pup was smuggled. It's actually a very, very challenging task. And there are things that can be done, but I can kind of signpost you to resources rather than talk you through it. So it's not always very easy to recognize that a puppy has been smuggled to the UK or that it has been bred on a puppy farm. And also there are kind of issues with owners' motivations or perhaps perceptions of the impact of puppy smuggling, as the 2020 survey showed that a third of owners acquiring a pup in 2020 didn't really mind or weren't that bothered whether that puppy came from a puppy farm or was smuggled. We know that perhaps as a result of those problematic kind of starts in life that those dogs had, that almost a third, 27% of dogs acquired after March 2020 show behaviors linked with inadequate socialization, such as aggression or reactivity, so kind of lunging and jumping and barking at people, other dogs, traffic and whatnot. So these are kind of issues, behavioral issues that obviously have impact on dog welfare. And if you wanted to buy a puppy or were curious about how to do it right, there is a website called the Puppy Contract, which can kind of walk you through various steps on how to do it well. And in addition to issues with the behavior impact of poor breeding, UK is an island, which means that a number of zoonotic diseases, so diseases that can be transmitted between dogs and people, have been eradicated or haven't been seen here for a very long time. And those diseases are still present in dogs that are imported into the UK. So for example, a pre-pandemic study from 2019 found that only 1.2% of overseas rescues, so these are different to obviously like smuggled puppies. These will be dogs that are being rescued from various places, often Cyprus, Serbia, Sri Lanka, Romania. These are your kind of Romanian rescues. They were imported to the UK on incorrect paperwork that didn't quite check for all of the required vaccinations and antibody tests to make sure that those dogs were disease-free and don't need to be quarantined. And indeed, 15% of them tested positive for Leishmania, which is a pathogen that leads to leishmaniasis. It's a skin disease that can be fatal in dogs if untreated, and it's also a zoonotic disease that can affect people. So there's quite a lot of those overseas rescues in the UK at the moment. So there are significant issues with zoonotic diseases infecting UK dog population as a result of inadequate testing of those dogs upon the point of entrance to the UK. And as a result, partially as a result of that, the DEFRA, so the department of the government responsible for like agricultural stuff, has banned commercial import of dogs from Ukraine and neighbors, which is like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, and like most of Europe to the UK at the moment, because the risk of importing a dog with rabies is actually quite high at the moment. So that's where we are. Kind of study that I can explain better. Another study carried out by Dogs Trust. As I mentioned, there are serious issues with dog acquisitions in the UK, serious in terms that they have negative impact on dog welfare. So one of the bigger projects carried out by Dogs Trust at the moment is Choosing My Dog study. And this study issued a survey that was answered by nearly 10,000 people that's still being analysed, and also carried out 142 semi-structured interviews with owners or caretakers of dogs, and these were carried out at Dogs Trust community events before the pandemic. So qualitative interviews are basically interviews where you have a set of questions written out that you want to ask of everyone, but you also may use kind of prompts and follow up what your participants are saying, just to kind of clarify and really understand their points of view and their experiences. And to give you an idea, most qualitative studies are based on maybe 10-15 interviews. So this study is based on 142 sets of interviews, and by sets of interviews they mean that one interview might be attended by a couple of people, like a husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend. So this is an enormous qualitative study in the scale of other qualitative studies. And the main goals of it was to understand the pre-purchase motivations, so why people want to get a dog in the first place, what dog owners actually do after deciding to get a dog. So do they look things online? Do they talk with family and friends? And things like that, and their acquisition behaviors. So how do they go about sourcing a dog? Do they go online to buy a dog online, or what do they pick with them when they go to pick up a puppy, and all sorts of things like that. And the first paper from the study has now been published. It is accessible, open access. So if you're interested, you can read through it. It's called Don't Bring Me a Dog, I'll Just Keep It. And in that study, the lead authors, Katrina and Becky, identified that basically the people acquire dogs following a path of planned and unplanned acquisitions. Your planned acquisitions are when people intend to get a dog, they intentionally search for a dog. And very interestingly for us, the unplanned acquisition are unexpected and unsought opportunities to acquire a dog. They often involve a participant's family or a friend, or people happening upon a dog in need, or dog being received as a gift. And often in those cases, the motivations for deciding to take the dog include like very strong emotional attachment and desire to help a vulnerable animal. And on the previous slide, I mentioned a study of overseas rescues. And in that study, the authors also found that people will often scroll through websites of dogs in Sri Lanka or Romania, and they will fall in love with a dog on the picture and they will decide to get that dog in the UK. And perhaps that kind of desire to help and this kind of emotional attachment kind of obscures some of the practicalities of getting a dog and some of the behavioral issues that those dogs might have, and it could mean that those people are not fully like aware of what they are getting themselves into. The next issue I want to discuss briefly is extreme breeding. I've mentioned already that one of the biggest kind of issue to do with breeding of brachycephalic dogs. These are the dogs with very, very short faces. So the dog on your left-hand side is not photoshopped. This is a pedigree dog bred according to UK's Kennel Club standards. As you can see, he's missing part of his face, right? He's missing like most of his nose and a breathing apparatus. And the dog on the right with the colorful collar is a dog bred by a Dutch breeder who aims to breed kind of healthier French bulldogs. So instead of breeding just to kind of have a dog that looks in a particular way, they aim to breed a dog with slightly longer nose so that they still have many characteristics of French bulldogs, but they are not so extreme as to that they suffer from many health issues related to that that look. And some of those health issues, essentially, most of those issues are down to the fact that the soft tissue inside those dogs' skulls, so the larynx and like breathing apparatus, is still designed for a dog with a longer face. But now that longer face is missing, so all of those body parts are kind of squashed into a much smaller space, and they are sagging, which means that those dogs kind of snore rather than breathe quite often, or it sounds a little bit like snoring. This is not normal. This is suggestive of BOAS, which is a breathing related kind of disease that breeds with very short faces often have. Another issue that those dogs may suffer is to do with the fact that they have very tiny nostrils, so they can't really get enough air through their noses. So those two things combined mean that they will suffer from breathing issues, in particular when they are getting a little bit older, and in particular when they are exercising. And that in turn means that they are at very, very high risk of getting a heat stroke. So they could get a heat stroke even when there is like 18 or 20 Celsius degrees outside, just because of the way they are designed. And obviously other breeds are linked with other health issues. But I wanted to focus on French bulldogs, because they are the most popular breeds in the UK right now. So there's a lot of them. And that's kind of another approach to studying dogs and dog behavior and health and welfare, is to use those ginormous data sets. There are two kind of companies / programs that work on those data sets. The first one is called VetCompass. It's based at the Royal Veterinary College in London. And the second one is called SavsNet and it's based in Liverpool. So they do similar things in the sense that they designed a large veterinary companion animal surveillance systems. So they work with vet practices and automatically kind of try to process veterinary records of animals that they see and try to report kind of real life conditions. So if there is like a vomiting bug in dogs, they may report where, in what region of the UK, and how many dogs are affected as it's sort of evolving. So the idea behind it is to catch maybe diseases that can be transmitted through dog population as early as possible, and to inform veterinary practices that those diseases are there, so that they can kind of, you know, pass the message to dog owners to maybe prevent their spread. So VetCompass at the moment operate in over 30% of UK practices, and they scan the records of more than 20 million of animals. So that's quite a lot of animals. And based on their research, they identified that compared to long-faced dogs, the brachy breeds, so your French bulldogs and so on, have 1.5 higher odds of having at least one health disorder. Brachy types showed also predisposition for 8 out of 30 recognized by them kind of disorders, and that breed was a protective factor only against 2 out of 30 disorders. A different study by Vet Compass also identified that whilst the life expectancy of dogs in the UK is on average 11.2 years, as you can see on this graph on your right, the life expectancy of French Bulldog is just 4.5 years. And that's just not good enough. I mean, this is, you know, having a dog is already countdown to a heartbreak, but 4.5 years is it's a shocking result, and something that I think as a nation of dog lovers we should be really ashamed of, that we got to a place where we produce so many so unhealthy dogs. But thanks to those large data sets, we are able to produce those estimates and to kind of bring more data, so that maybe further down the line there can be more powerful campaigns aiming to change the breed standards, so that dog owners or breeders of those dogs don't feel pressurized to breed dogs with very extreme looks. Okay, the next issue, as I've mentioned, is obesity. Probably won't be surprised that, like, kind of reflecting human population, dogs also suffer from obesity epidemic. The reason why we worry about obesity in dogs is that it has very similar risk factors to obesity in people. So it is linked with higher odds of cardiovascular diseases, so kind of heart attacks and strokes. It increases the risk of some forms of cancers, and it also significantly increases the chances of developing musculoskeletal problems. And these problems include stuff like arthritis, which is probably one of the most common chronic health issues in dogs in the UK. So chronic health issues are issues that dogs will experience over 1 year of life, that often involve a quite significant costs, and that affect dogs by causing them pain. And also these dogs have shorter life expectancy. And if obesity is a problem for dogs with long faces, it's even more of a problem for the brachycephalic dogs, because they already have breathing difficulties and walking difficulties. So if you add kind of more weight to them, those issues are just worse. And in 2010, 59% of UK dogs were overweight, which is already a very high number. But in 2017, a study found that the kind of scanned dogs at various dog shows across the UK found that 65% of adult dogs were overweight and 9% were obese. So the majority of dogs that you will see on your daily basis are probably not ideal weight. And unfortunately, that study also showed that juvenile dogs, so dogs younger than 24 months, like almost 40% of them were overweight. And as the dogs were getting mature, they were putting on more and more weight. So this is already problematic, but we've also found that 9% of owners said that their dog put on weight since March 2020, so during the pandemic. And below on your left, I've included this is how you tell dogs' weight and whether a dog is obese or overweight. You don't actually weight them because they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You use a tool which is called body conditioning score. So the dog in the middle is ideal kind of shape, and the dogs on the left are underweight, and the dogs on the right are overweight. So you assess dogs' weight by kind of comparing them, by looking at them from kind of bird's eye view and from the side. So you look at the tummy tuck, and you look at different ribs and things like that to assess their body weight. So it's not actually very straightforward, which might be a contributing factor to why owners struggle to identify their dogs being obese and overweight. But we also know that, similar to research in humans, that when a dog is identified to have excess weight, owners are often quite upset. It's a stigmatized subject. And my recent study, we were asking people if they found symptoms of kind of chronic conditions in dogs, how quickly would they seek help? This is what the graph on your right shows. And this graph shows that most people definitely would not seek help with their vet if they thought that their dog was overweight or had an excess weight. So it is still not really considered a serious sort of health issues. By contrast, if you look at the graph above, it shows that if a dog suddenly started bumping into objects or turned lame, people would seek help with their veterinarian pretty quickly. So owners' perception of obesity maybe also could change a little bit so that they will be more willing to seek help. But similarly to human research, we also don't really know what is the best way for dogs to lose weight. And we do know that it is very, very challenging process, especially because some breeds actually have genetic mutations that mean that their kind of cue to hunger doesn't get turned off. So for instance, dogs that are guide dogs often will have that issue. And it might be because we bred them to be very, very trainable. And most of the training of those dogs involves food. So effectively we bred for dogs that are most food motivated. And the kind of dark side of it is that some of those dogs might have a genetic mutation, which means that they just feel hunger at all times and will scavenge for food out of hunger. Okay. So one of the things that we've done to kind of try to identify owners' perceptions of different health conditions is in the recent study. We've asked dog owners questions about urgency to seek help for different health issues to try to identify what are the characteristics of health issues that maybe promote rapid health seeking, and what are the characteristics that make owners think whether they should seek help. And the characteristics that promote rapid health seeking is sort of visual impact, so things like lameness, and also impact on the owner. So if a dog started house soiling quite quickly out of blue after being house trained for a while, they would seek help quickly. But in terms of like behavioral problems or excess weight, owners would be more reluctant to spend money on the vet or to seek veterinary help. The next kind of issue that I've mentioned is that dog behavior and owners' understanding of dogs. This is a study from Generation Pup. I will talk about it in a minute a bit more. But in the study, the lead authors looked at prevalence of behavior problems reported by owners. So these might not be actual behavior problems. It's just a question whether an owner sees a dog as having a behavior that they find problematic. At 6 and 9 months, so it's a longitudinal study, it follows dogs throughout their lifetime. And at 6 months, 31% of owners said that their dog shows a behavior that they find problematic. At 9 months, it was 35%. The most commonly reported behaviors were pulling on the lead, jumping up at people, and poor recall. But interestingly, that study also looked at the kind of more factual reporting of those behaviors. So it compared how many people at different time points found those behaviors problematic, and how many reported that their dogs were actually engaging in that behavior. And for barking at people, excessive barking not at people, jumping up at people, lead pulling, and poor recall, the number of people reporting that their dog does engage in that behavior, so the numbers in pink, were much greater than the number of respondents saying that that behavior was actually problematic to them, which suggests that dog owners have some kind of levels of resilience or acceptance of problematic behavior, and these might differ between people. So not only we want to kind of people to understand dog behavior and understand how dog owners see dog behaviors, but we also want to learn more about resilience and what factors shape owners' resilience to those behaviors, because ultimately people will act on the perceived problem behaviors and not behaviors that are potentially like problematic. So some of the follow-up work on the study includes trying to identify what type of training method may impact problematic behaviors, and investigating where owners seek advice for those behavior problems, as well as understanding factors related to owners' resilience to problematic behaviors. Okay, another approach that we took to understanding dog behavior, in one of my PhD studies, I've looked at online videos, YouTube videos of human-dog interactions preceding a bite, and I developed an ethogram, so kind of like a list of behaviors that you can identify in a dog and in a person. And I've looked at what happened 35 seconds before a bite from dog's perspective and from person's perspective. So you can see that 35 seconds before a bite, dogs their ears are less often in kind of neutral position. They are holding their body awkwardly, so in kind of bizarre angle. They are staring more, they are frowning more, they are stiffening their whole body more, they are snapping more, but there wasn't that much difference in terms of panting, paw lifting, licking, and possibly head turning. And we've also found that owners or people interacting with those dogs, the main thing that they were doing before a bite was standing over a dog, so kind of leaning like a tower above the dog, and not giving dog that much space, or just petting them. So that was the first part of the analysis, sort of looking at what we can gauge from YouTube videos. And the second part included, again, thematic analysis of comments underneath the same videos. And we found that people thought that bites were caused because of the nature of a dog. So they thought that it was due to dogs' wild nature, or their inability to control their urges. They also didn't think that dogs were blameworthy, and they were generally idealizing dogs' nature and sort of taking it out at the victims. People thought that bites happened because of issues with controlling a dog, and because of breed. There was a lot of talk about breed determinism, and some genes as predisposing dogs to being aggressive. And people also talked about blaming kind of the victim or parents or owners of the dog for a bite. And quite a lot of people were also normalizing bites, so seeing them as a normal part of dog ownership, which again is problematic, because if people are accepting bites, then it's very hard to prevent them. And again, another study where I was a co-author identified hospital admissions. We looked at hospital admissions and A&E admissions for dog bites in the UK. It's a big epidemiological study using quite like typical epidemiological methods, so trying to define the incidents and trying to count them as best as possible. And for a year since I started my PhD about dog bites, we've heard that bites happen primarily to children, and this large study did show that bites happen primarily to children, as you can see in blue above, but it also showed that it's the bites to adults that are driving the increasing trend in numbers of bites in the UK. John Tallock has also produced a map showing where bites in the UK happen most often. Perhaps not that surprisingly, but that map kind of reflects the areas that are most underprivileged in the whole of UK. So there is quite a significant overlap between levels of deprivation and poverty and number of bites. And John also was able to calculate how much bites cost the NHS, and I think the total in financial year was around 60 million in financial year 2017-2018, when looking at estimated direct costs through hospital admission and accident and emergency attendance. Which is interesting because until that publication, the estimated cost was around 2 million. So it was a big bump, and hopefully that can mean that there will be more funds for prioritizing bite prevention. Close to the end of the presentation. Okay, as I mentioned before, like owners understanding dog behavior is a significant issue, especially when preventing bites. All of those pictures, I found all of those pictures as an example of lovely interactions between children and dogs. And on every single one of those pictures, the dog is extremely unhappy and stressed, and quite likely to bite the child. And given that, you know, on all of those pictures, the child is hugging the dog, possibly without the dog being able to not to engage in this interaction, it's not that surprising. So with the Labrador on top, you can see a bit of a white of their eyes. They are panting, their ears are pulled back, and the dog is turning their head away from the child, and that's a sign that the dog isn't happy. The big dog, the Bordeaux, where the child is playing a doctor, the ears are pulled back like kind of Bugs Bunny ears. That's your big sign that the dog isn't happy. And the dog is looking away from the child and sort of standing in a very awkward position as if they couldn't walk away. And the dog at the bottom with the little boy again, that dog is looking very stressed, looking away from the boy. The eyes are like tense and squeezed, ears are pulled back. You can see the commissures of the mouth are kind of pulled quite far back, which is reflective of the tension in that dog. So none of those dogs are happy, but the research into parents and owners' perceptions of child-dog interaction shows that generally owners don't notice those things and also don't really think that a family pet dog could harm the child, and they often they're not really aware of kind of context of in which risky interactions can occur, and there is possibly more work that's needed into learning how parents are supervising children around dogs, and then also trying to figure out the best way to do it. Yeah, as I've mentioned, some of the studies, some of the findings from the study come from the Generation Pup study, which is the study I'm working on right now. And this is a longitudinal study, which means that we recruit dogs that are younger than 16 weeks and we follow them throughout their life. We send their owners regular surveys that ask about dog behavior and health. And the purpose of the study is to understand big problems that I've mentioned before, like obesity, arthritis, epilepsy, and also understand behavioral problems in dogs and how early life experiences and later life experiences may shape the risk of developing behaviors like separation anxiety or noise phobias or aggression. And those kind of longitudinal studies can really inform us about best practices that can improve dog welfare. So it's a great study. And we've already published a few papers on this, and at the moment our dogs are still young, so a lot of those publications sort of baseline descriptions of the population. So we've looked at factors associated with acquiring a puppy under 8 weeks of age, which we know is kind of problematic because it might mean that the puppy was taken away from the mother too soon. We also described how long puppies sleep for and how it changes over the first 12 months of life. We've described how often and frequently dog owners walk their dogs for, because there's an awful lot of advice for owners how long they should walk their dogs for, but none of this advice is based on any research. So we're hoping to cover the gap. And we are also looking at approaches to training and what factors affect owners' decision how to train their dog. And we look about factors associated with neutering dogs in the UK. And in the future, we will look how neutering might impact on dog behavior. And these are my final few slides. So I've mentioned that COVID messed things up a little bit for dogs in the UK. In one of the studies, we've looked into what happened when COVID hit in terms of kind of management practices of dogs. And we found that generally people were walking dogs for just as long as before, for longer than before, sorry, but less frequently. And they spend more time with their dogs at home. And that qualitative analysis helped us to understand that people were stressed during pandemic, and often having a dog around was quite a helpful thing for mental health and anxiety. However, those dogs that ended up staying in the house for longer and had the kind of biggest change in their routine also ended up developing separation-related behaviors later on, which is problematic because it's a huge welfare concern for dogs that now are left alone at home where the owners went back to work. We've also found that the pandemic did impact access to veterinary healthcare. We found that whilst most of emergency cases were seen, there was a significant impact on preventative healthcare such as vaccinations, neutering, and also for ongoing care for dogs with chronic health conditions. And that primarily impacted the most vulnerable owners, so those who, excuse me, who already struggled accessing transport, owners who already struggled with paying for the dog's vet bills, and owners who maybe struggled with computer literacy because a lot of consultations during lockdown were carried out remotely. And we also found that during lockdown there was an increase in number of dog bites to children, because one of the main predictor of when bites to children are going to increase is when children are spending more time with dogs. So children were at home, dogs were at home, there were more bites to children. So thank you very much for your attention. I think I'm bang on time, 45 minutes. So in conclusion, dogs are living longer, but their welfare is at risk, especially right now. And if you want to get a dog, the simple best thing that you can do is to acquire them responsibly. So check for puppy contract and learn how to get a dog responsibly. And in general, I've used so many different analytical methods in my research so far. So my best advice is to pick an analytical method that reflects your research question, not necessarily departmental affiliations. And don't be scared to use mixed methods approaches and to switch between different approaches to make the most out of your data. Try to collaborate and try to publish if you can, and also join Generation Pup if you have a puppy younger than 16 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really, really illuminating, actually. I love that. Learned so much about dogs that I would never have known otherwise. Yeah, in terms of questions, I don't know whether anyone has any questions that come to mind. I have a rather naive question, which is, I've never owned a dog, but I do love seeing them in the park and such, but I'm just wondering whether there's any kind of generalizable advice for people that have dogs with kind of behavioral issues, or whether it's very much a unique kind of case by case basis that you give to these dogs.
Yeah, well, try not to make it worse. So don't use anything aversive. Don't punish your dog. Don't shout at them. Don't do anything punitive. That's gonna make anything worse. But also figure out how to find a reliable behaviorist. So there are a few registers of people with relevant qualification. One of them is called CCAB. Another one is called APBC, and the third one is called APBT. So find someone with those accreditations, because that means that they have been practicing for a while. They had to submit a portfolio. They had to have the relevant qualification to help you. Don't necessarily speak with your vet and ask for a behavioral referral, but vets aren't trained in behavior of dogs, so don't necessarily expect that your vet will know how to deal with it, or that they will have time to deal with it, because their consultations are timed and they shouldn't exceed 10 minutes.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, thank you very much. Alex, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you very, very much for the talk. I absolutely love dogs, and I'm actually hoping to maybe towards the end of this year get a dog myself.
Brilliant.
Just thinking about, there was a lot of focus on, obviously it seems like a lot of the work with Generation Pup and that is following puppies throughout their time with the owners. But at the start you were mentioning about like attitudes surrounding adopting rescues, and it seems like I know people who have like Romanian rescue dogs, and is there a reason why, or like, would I be right in thinking that when it comes to rescuing dogs, there's a much, it's not uncommon for people to look at rescuing dogs from abroad, and like, what are the reasons people tend to choose to do that rather than looking at adopting a dog from the UK?
Excellent question. I think you're hinting at a controversial subject here, but I'm happy to answer it. So basically, the really reputable and good dog shelters in the UK have very stringent criteria for rehoming of their dogs, which mean that you probably will have to have a garden of sorts. You probably won't be able to live in the rented accommodation.
Okay.
And you might also need to spend some time at home. And there are differences, and there are usually dogs that don't need to meet all of those criteria. But if you come to some of those reputable UK-based rescues and say that you want a Labrador Retriever or a particular type of a dog, they might not have a match for your circumstances. And they have to be so picky because they are based on donations. So one kind of dodgy rehoming where a child gets bitten means that they may lose a major source of income and lose their reputation. So they have to be quite picky, and they also want to do the best for the dogs in their care. So they're trying to, you know, to match people as best as possible, which means that a lot of people who try to rehome from good rescues in the UK are rejected. And that means that they turn to overseas rescues that are often much more relaxed in terms of their criteria, but they are also more relaxed in terms of they won't provide you with any support post rehoming. You're kind of left on your own. And so that's probably one of the reasons, and the other reason is because border control of the UK isn't great at picking up dogs that are imported on wrong paperwork. So so it's not that difficult to like rescue dogs from abroad necessarily. And you know, like there are so many organizations, so if you want like actual tangible recommendations, just email me afterwards. But generally, this is what like fuels overseas rescues, is that it's easier than it has been in the past, and it's hard to rehome dogs in the UK. And we've been saying that it's better to adopt than to buy from breeders. But personally, I think that, you know, there's nothing wrong buying from breeders if you have a breeder that breeds dog very responsibly, that socializes them from day one, that makes sure that only healthy animals are being bred, that breeds them infrequently. The welfare of those dogs is probably very, very good. And it means that the welfare of their owners is good as well. And yeah, so there are no issues necessarily with breeding dogs like that, but there is also not enough of like good breeders in the UK, which then again fuels smuggling of puppies from abroad. So there are issues in the supply chain.
Okay, I don't know if anyone else has any other. Yeah, there are more questions, so I'll defer to others. But yeah, thanks very much for this one. I'll definitely email for some advice on finding a good shelter for dogs. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Alex. Scott, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks for the great talk. I always find it quite interesting. Of course, I laughed when you showed those pictures of the children with the dogs and how the dogs were unhappy. I know myself that whenever I have to encounter anyone under the age of 29, my ears fold back and I'm really uncomfortable. And from my childhood, I remember quite vividly, whenever my sister would enter the room, the dog would run away from her. So I mean, but that's the level of my sophistication with respect to understanding dogs or reading dogs. Is there can I go to YouTube and learn how to read dogs I imagine there's a lot of sort of stupidness on there too, right?
No, there is a lot of good like annotated YouTube resources that I can share again that kind of show you, you know, what I would be looking at when assessing how comfortable a dog is, and they will point you out like, look at the ears right now, look at the tail right now, look at like the muscle tension. And it also takes some practice and of like watching and picking it up. And there's actually some research on neuroscience of brains of dog trainers, and it shows that different regions of the brain are involved when dog trainers and behaviorists are watching dogs compared to like just regular dog owners, because you like train your head in recognizing those particular patterns.
Also, if you can give me a link for reading humans, that would really be too. Thanks.
Yeah, cheers, Scott. Conal, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, thanks for the talk. One dog question and one research question, if that's okay. Sure. Do you get puppy farms posing as overseas rescues?
Yes.
So people think they're doing a good thing and they're just...
Yes, that's a part of the problem, that some of the really good rescues have been kind of tainted because like dodgy people who just want money will pose as rescues and try to sell dogs from puppy farms, or even they will steal dogs from abroad and sell them in the UK as overseas rescues.
And technical question, the text mining software, what tools did you use for that?
I used R and inbuilt packages, like different dictionaries in R to compare, because they different lexicons have training on slightly different databases. So I've used multiple ones to kind of triangulate.
Okay, but they're all R packages?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, did you have a second question that you wanted to ask before?
Yeah, it was just kind of about in terms of like brachycephalic breeds and the rise in popularity of them, whether, and again, I suppose that ties into driving people, like they have an idea of a specific breed they want, not necessarily just brachycephalic breeds, but there are popular breeds like Dachshunds and Labradors and whatever,
Yeah.
that they think they want that particular breed, which puts them off adopting a dog that suits them. I don't know, is there any I don't know, looking at like analysis of attitudes towards different dog breeds and anything that can be done to try and...
Yes, there is some analysis. There's a researcher from Royal Veterinary College, Rowena Packer, who's done her whole career around brachycephalic breeds and why they are popular, and kind of essentially, in short, people who want brachycephalic breeds want them because they see them as more attached and more kind of baby-like than other breeds. And they generally have very strong attachment to those dogs and love them very, very much. And generally they are aware of all of the health issues, but they think that those issues pertain to other dogs of that breed, not their own dog. So there is some kind of perceptual bias there as well.
So it's like, yeah, educating people about the prominence of these health issues in all dogs of these breeds, and it's like a common thing, and just trying to raise awareness.
People seem to be aware that this is an issue, but they think that those health problems will happen to other dogs of that breed, not to their own dog. So it's almost like a broader perceptual bias rather than just necessarily lack of education. But sure, like education probably would help, because I'm sure not everyone is as aware of like costs involved in owning a brachycephalic dog and how expensive surgeries to improve their breathing are.
And how uncomfortable it is for the dog.
Yeah, and just the fact that they, you know, their life expectancy is 4.5 years.
Yeah, the 4.5 years was a shocking figure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have another question, which is, yeah, I'm kind of conflicted personally, because I would quite like a dog in the future. I can't have one yet, but I'm unsure whether I would go for a rescue as opposed to just going for a pup, because I feel like getting a puppy is kind of more malleable and you have more influence over its early behavior, and therefore later down the line its behavioral kind of temperament, as opposed to getting a rescue or rehome dog, because I feel like they might have, selfishly, I think they might have behavioral defects already, which is why they would have been kind of left there. I don't know if you could speak about that at all, because I know I'm kind of naive about it, but I'd like to know a little bit more about that.
I can answer, and then I probably have to shoot off. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so much.
So the fact that dogs and rescues are there for behavioral issues is a bit of a myth.
Right.
Some of them might be there because the owner couldn't cope with like 1-year-old juvenile dog that's just really bouncy, and that might be the behavior issue. So it's a behavior issue that many people can cope with and can work on, and it can be modified. So they are not always like damaged goods. Often it will be just, you know, people don't have time for walking, don't have time for exercising those dogs, or struggle with training. Their circumstances change. If you go to big UK rescues and are honest with them and are not like very biased towards particular breed, they can offer you a number of suggestions that can meet like your lifestyle. So they're not always damaged goods, but sure, they can have some behavior problems. And then in terms of puppies, it is really hard work to get the puppy socialization right, and so much rides on it. So like it might be that you have a dog that's more malleable, but you might also get a dog that, you know, that has come from a puppy farm and already had really bad socialization and really awful experiences before it even got to you. And these are things that you will have to work really hard on. So on one hand, with the shelter dogs, they might have some behavioral issues, but you know what you're getting. And with puppies, you have no idea how they're going to develop, and the early puppy days can be very challenging and difficult. So there isn't like one best approach. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Sarah. All
Thank you
right.
so
Well,
much.
yeah, I know you have a lot of meetings today. So yeah, thank you again for your presentation. Really excellent. It was great to see you. And hopefully we'll be able to maybe see you in person at some point in the
Yeah,
future.
that would be great. And if you have any questions, then just email me. You can share my email.
Yeah. I know there was one thing, sorry, I know you have somewhere else to get to, but you wanted to propose a hackathon in the future.
Yes.
So I don't know if it's worth just setting maybe like a couple of sentences about context if you'd like
so
to.
We don't really know, but we have a lot of data that we could do with figuring out the best way to analyze. So it will be hackathon on large data set, and either it would be our own data collected through us, or analysis of Twitter related conversations about dogs. But I'm in conversation with my colleagues to figure out like what's the best approach from our perspective, but we will be in touch.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. See you later.
All right.
Bye.
Have a lovely day. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks.